Okay, it's 1 o'clock Eastern time here in Ontario and the Eastern Provinces of Canada. We'd like to thank everybody for joining us for our virtual lunch and learn here at CETEC Group. We're doing these on Tuesdays at 1 and Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Topics are upon request. We had some questions about tracking backup, tracking consoles and busking. So we're going to have a conversation today about the ETC EOS family line. And most of what we do cover here is true for the Hog line as well, and some of the previous generations of EOS or of ETC consoles. So without further ado, if you do have questions or you're just getting in here on time, there is a Q&A running on the right-hand side. There's a little picture at the top. It's a speech balloon with a question mark in it. You can ask your questions there. The moderators will be watching them, answering them, and posting them live to the chat. They're both in English and French. We'd like to thank both Michael Harris and Charles Cadeau for joining us today. They will be here and engaging in some of the conversation. I'm going to start with a PowerPoint presentation. I have a couple of video slides and a live console software demo just for a discussion about busking and showing some of the magic sheet operation that we have with our consoles. So without further ado, I expect this to take about 30 minutes, and we again appreciate everybody joining us. I hope your families are well and you're working through this situation. So here we go. Click on the right buttons, we'll be all set. So an overview of our presentation today. We're going to be talking about what console systems in the ETC family we're reviewing. We're going to talk about the different subconsoles in the EOS family architecture. There's an ecosystem of consoles that make up the EOS family, and we're going to have a quick review of those pieces of the puzzle and how they all work together. We're also going to talk about tracking versus tracking backup. It's very common in the industry for people to be confused in some of these terms, and many manufacturers talk about them differently. So I'm going to explain how ETC classes these terminology and have a little discussion about how they're used and how they interconnect. We're also going to talk about some backup use case scenarios, why you'd want backup consoles running or secondary consoles running in a system. We're going to talk about busking. It says we can busk with EOS family consoles, and this is true. We do have a little short video presentation at the end. It's only about a minute and change, and it's a presentation of our Augment 3D or augmented, as ETC calls it, open beta release for our 3.0 software that'll come out with the console shortly. And then again at the end, if there has been any Q&A questions that have come along in the Q&A section here and they need to be answered, I'll get the guys to chime in and we'll have a little roundtable conversation about and answer some of those questions. So again, thank you for joining us. Let's go to our first slide. So what is the EOS family console line and what does it consist of? Nelson, if I get the high sign, would be good. There is a variety of consoles that live, is the quality not so great? There's a variety of consoles that live in...
There's no music behind it if they're...
Oh, no, that's okay. Sorry, guys. So there's a variety of consoles that live in the EOS family. Their video files will play later with a little bit of tunes. So let's just talk about what's on the screen right now. So starting from the top down, we have the EOS TI console, which is our Big Daddy EOS console. It has the largest touch screens in the whole lineup. They're dedicated touch screens as part of the physical architecture of the console. We work down in sizes, and maybe at the end here we'll have Michael talk about what the future of those consoles look like. The next step down will be the Geo. The TI usually sits in most performing art spaces, large theater venues, and where some physical requirements are of consideration. The Geo console is a little bit smaller, has smaller touchscreens, a limited number of motorized faders on the console. The screens on this are adjustable as well, and again, we see this used a lot in studio environments where the screen real estate maybe not be critical, but size in the studio control room would be that way. The Geo at 5 is the next evolution of the Geo. The Geo at 5 has a 19-inch touchscreen on it and some dedicated select buttons on the left-hand side. A very limited set of motorized playback faders. we kind of jump down. So those are the three consoles in the EOS family line that have dedicated monitors that are part of it. We jump down then to the Ion XE, which is the replacement for the original Ion series, which was one of the first EOS consoles out there. The Ion XE does not have dedicated monitors. It has outputs on the back that we can work with for external monitors that can be touchscreens, so third-party monitors with touchscreens. Again, high schools, maybe mid-level, local performing arts centers or community centers. Element consoles have a considerable number of faders on them. So if you have a requirement for direct channel or submaster faders, an Element console is one of the most economical solutions to accomplish this. Again, external monitors required. They can be touch monitors. All of the EOS family consoles support full touch capacity for all of the features. We then move down to a Nomad and a Nomad Puck. ETC Nomad is basically a remote version of the software. It's the exact same software that the big the big consoles like the TI and the Geo run, or the Ion XE. So the software files or the show files are interoperable between them all. The Nomad makes use of either dedicated hardware, and that's what the Nomad Puck is, which is a solid-state computer with the software running on it. You supply your keyboard, mouse, and video, and you will have a console in a box, or just the Nomad software is available to be run on your own laptop or PC or Apple computer, and a dongle is provided. Both of these devices become a network output device, and you would need either a gadget from ETC, which is a USB to DMX gateway, or a dedicated networking gateway. At the bottom of the screen, we have remote processors. They come in a variety of channel count. The RPUs are a rack mount computer, for lack of a better term, with some dedicated macro buttons on the front of them, and these are meant to be installed in an equipment rack, on stage, backstage, in a studio, in a remote server room, and act as a remote processor. And we'll cover this in our backup discussions about what those devices do. There's a sundry of accessories with the EOS family line, and that includes fader wings that have digital displays on them for indication of what the faders are doing, as well as a programming wing that can be used with the Nomad or the Nomad Puck scenario, which basically gives you everything on an XE, an Ion XE console, on a simple USB, really advanced USB keyboard that gives you tactile buttons and dedicated faders to use for everything. Legacy consoles are included in this line of the EOS family. So the original Ion console, the original Element console, the original EOS console are all continue to be supported up to a certain point with the software, and are interoperable between them. Obviously, the constraints for feature sets or channel counts that we'll have a conversation about in a minute may limit you in some of those actions. So that's the EOS family lineup. All of these consoles work together. They are able to share show files between all of them. They can import show files from some of the legacy EOS family consoles, and also all of the previous consoles in the ETC family line. They also have the ability to bring in show files from other manufacturers' environments, or light write files, or just quite a mix of file formats that they can support. So the whole point of this conversation was a discussion of tracking versus tracking backup. So hopefully we get that up on the screen there. There we go. There is much confusion in the industry between manufacturers, between consoles. Everybody has a little different flavor of their definition of tracking and tracking backup consoles. And they're really talking about two different technologies in the software. Again, each manufacturer is a little bit different, so please refer to your specific manufacturer if you're researching these topics. But in the ETC world, tracking consoles remember the move fade instructions. And so just an example audibly here is that if you record a cue with channel 1 at full, and then you record the next cue with channel 1 at 50%. Each of those cues have what's called a move fade instruction for channel 1. So in the first cue, channel 1 would have been providing a move fade instruction to go to 100% over a certain time. And in Q2, then channel 1 would have been told to go to 50%. And those move fade instructions are specifically what the EOS family consoles record in their show files in each of the cues. Where the tracking comes in is because we're recording only the move fade instructions. If you do not change or modify or provide a new move fade instruction, say in Q3, and I always use the porch light as a good example. So the porch light is turned on in the first cue and stays on for the whole show. Since we do not provide a new move fade instruction in Q3 as an example, the light's going to stay at the intensity, or the channel is going to stay at the intensity that it was at until we provide a new move fade instruction. This allows us to make only the edits in between each of our cues that are recorded during a show, and it also allows us to quickly go back and make some of the key edits for fixtures and channels that need to change throughout the show. So again, the porch light is a really good example of this. The porch light is turned on at the beginning of the show in Q1. It's turned on to 50%, and the porch light on a practical set stays on for the whole show. And when you're done queuing your 400 cues in your show, the lighting designer comes back to you and says, "Hey, I really wanted that porch light to only be at 50%, or even dimmer." Instead of going back and having to modify each of the cues manually, you would be able to go back where the move fade instruction was played, and in our case it would be cue number 1. You would go back to where the move fade instruction was applied, modify that cue to be your new intensity, and the console would automatically track that value from that cue until the next move fade instruction. Tracking consoles digital lighting consoles did not always have the ability to do these tracking type move fade instructions. ETC consoles prior to EOS, whether you're talking about Express or Obsession consoles or Insight consoles, the Expression software had the ability to be a cue only or a modified version of tracking as well. So ETC's been doing this for quite some time. The EOS family consoles allow you to actually toggle the console as an overall in either a cue only mode or a tracking mode. So the console has in the setup screen and a dedicated button on most of them that allow you to shift the whole console operation from being tracking or cue only. This allows someone to record a show in the tracking mode and then switch to cue only mode and go and make edits at random places through their cue list without actually affecting the remainder of the show file. The console is always remembering the move fade instructions, so even though we've switched the mode of the console to operate in cue only, for that either instance in time or for the period that the whole console switched, it is still remembering all of the move fade instructions in the software, and it really has to do with how it represents that data in the show list in the spreadsheet for the cues. So again, if you're in the wrong mode and you're recording a show, it is not the end of the world. You can simply switch the console into tracking mode and it will automatically continue to track wherever there's not been a new move fade instruction. Hey Michael, is there anything that you'd like to chime in on tracking consoles?
The only thing I'd like to add to that is that you can track backwards as well. So if you have made a change, for example, your porch light, and it wanted to be at full at the beginning of the show and then change to 50%, you can actually pick the point where the change ends. So maybe it's another daylight scene, and track back to a specific cue point. So that's one of the features that makes it really easy to make adjustments on the fly. The other point of in the line of cue only and tracking, there's another function that's called blocking cues. So if you want to track to a specific point, the porch light needs to be on at 50% up to this specific point, and they go back and change, the designer changes it to 60%. You only want it to track to a block cue or a specific point in the in your cue stack. So that's a couple features of how tracking works.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so let's talk about tracking backup consoles now. And these two, again, these terminologies get intermixed all of the time. A tracking backup console is a network solution that, specifically in the ETC family, allow us to have multiple consoles on a network. That's a standard Ethernet network. And the consoles can act in a master and slave environment where the master console is retaining the show file and is able to push that show file down to the slave or client modules on the network. And the tracking feature that when we talk about tracking backup consoles is when the show is being edited or played, so we're running through an active queue list where there's outputs actually actively going on, the consoles are all maintaining that position in the show file. So if I'm hitting go on the master console and it's running through a queue list, that is also taking place in real time on the backup console. What happens then is our outputs on our consoles, and this is a key component that we'll talk about in a minute, is how you actually retain your lighting output. But the outputs on the consoles then are always coming from the master console. If for some reason there's a failure, I always use the example of somebody spilling their Coca-Cola on a console. So as soon as someone spills their Coke on the master console and it decides to let some sparks and smoke out, the synchronization between the master and the client or backup console is lost. And since we were synchronized not only in where we were in the show file, but any changes or edits or data that was in part of the show file was completely in sync, the output console, or sorry, the backup console at that point will immediately take over and continue to either play the show from somebody pushing the go button or automated features in that show file, as well as immediately start outputting the lighting outputs on the network. So this is an example I have up on the screen here. Is we have EOS TIs and an RPU would be an example of a tracking backup setup. In most large performance venues, whether it's the National Arts Center or Stratford, venues like that, they have probably a Big Daddy console and an RPU, and the RPU is sitting in the lighting booth in most cases and is tracking the master console. There's always a cheat that I inform people of, and I may be contradicting ETC here a little bit, but a lot of the time what we ask people to do is actually make the RPU, the remote processing unit, to be the master console. That way, if you're running your system remotely, you can control the master with your TI console, your slave, and hit the go button and all those types of things on your console. If the RPU then fails, it is failing then to the console that's physically sitting in front of you. And if for some reason you spill your Coke on the backup console, which you're actually operating the show from, the RPU is already running the show, and that's why the RPUs actually have dedicated buttons on the front. So there can be a go button on there or a backup look button and whatnot. We can talk some other time about some of the theory behind programming backup systems and how you may want to structure your show files and whatnot. Another example may be whether you have two like type of consoles, so two Ion XEs as an example. There's a lot of smaller performance venues and studios that would end up in a scenario where they would have two like type of consoles, and they can use these two consoles independently most days. And when there is, say, a broadcast event, they could bring their second console in, join it on the network, set it to run in backup mode, and there is not a lot of settings to do, assuming that the consoles are on their correct IP addresses and on a standard network. You can simply launch the console software at the beginning in backup mode, and it will look for its master and get up and running. There are some online tutorial videos on ETC's YouTube site that help you deal with configuration, and anybody at CETEC or Field Services more than happy to help you with that. So two like type consoles are quite common as well, where they're using that. There's also an ability to back up any of the consoles with a nomad. So you can run an element console, which is a dedicated physical console, and a Nomad, which is again a dongle on your laptop or PC, and use that Nomad to back up your console. And I think Michael reminded me earlier there, though, that the lowest common denominator of outputs, so as an example, if you only have a single universe Nomad that is able to put out 512 channels, when you are running that in a backup scenario specifically, you would be limited to the backup scenario of only 1,000 or 512 channels when you're using an Element console. So it's important when you are thinking about backup situations that you make sure that your devices either have the maximum required channel count that you're going to require, or at least they're equal between whatever your master is and your backup. The system won't actually get into the backup scenario in the first place. If there is a mismatch, it will tell you and notify you of your channel restrictions. And if anybody does have an ETC console and you're questioning what output count your console actually is at, you can simply get to the home live screen, hit the displays button if you choose. There's an about button from the general settings page there, a dedicated button on most consoles. Hit about, and it's going to tell you your version, as well as your output counts and channel counts in the CIA, the central information area in the bottom right corner. Hey, Mike, what about backup?
So thanks, Wayne. You covered the channel count requirement. That's something to very much keep into consideration. Also, on all of ETC consoles now, there is only 2 versions of it when you buy them as far as output's concerned, and that is a fully unlocked console to its maximum output. So on a EOS TI, that's 24,000 outputs. On an Ion, or sorry, an Element, it would be 2 universes or 1,000 outputs, and then you can upgrade your elements to a 2K. So there is only so what I'm saying is there's a maximum output and there's a base level output on each console, and they overlap in their ranges, but basically any console can back up any other console, and certainly the RPUs are the console in a box. And as Wayne said, and I agree with him completely, the RPU becomes your main console and you're running actually a backup or a client. So those are important things to consider, is the channel count. And I know we're going to jump into how you put that together a little bit with networking, because that's also important. So you don't ever have to go back into a situation that we once upon a time had to do, is, oh, I'm in backup, now I need to unplug DMX lines and plug them into another device. So networking is the key there. So back to you, Wayne.
Exactly. So we'll go to the next slide and we'll cover that network setup here with a little discussion about how it's used. So in a backup scenario, most consoles have physical DMX ports on the back of them that DMX is coming out, and obviously they have all of the ETC consoles now have multiple network jacks as well. So we are not only putting out live DMX in the back of the console, but streaming ACN over the network. In a backup scenario, like Michael said, you wouldn't want to have your physical DMX outputs connected to the primary or secondary console, because even though you're on a network and your show file transfers control, your outputs would be then physically patched to the wrong device at that point. In the days of CBC gone by, CBC used to have an actual physical A/B switch, if anybody remembers computer printer switches, where you'd flip the rotary knob and it would actually move 6 universes of DMX between the 2 physical console outputs. With the advent of networking and ACN gateways, whether it be Pathways gateways or our gateways, we would want our outputs to be native on the network. We want them to be streaming ACN or ArtNet gateways on the network. There is a scenario then that what happens is, as the master fails or we move to the backup console, we would then be maintaining our output from those gateways. There's some configuration, what are called priorities on streaming ACN. We'd want to make sure that obviously our backup console that's going to take over is taking over the same or a higher priority, so that it captures controls of those things. If you're in a situation where your network gateways are not, where your network gateways are concerns where they're going to be a failure point as well, There is a couple of solutions to be able to have multiple gateways merged back into an input of a DMX distribution system. And that would be what we call the advanced application engineering setups, where ETC as well as field service and CETEC have the ability to work on those systems with you. So I'd like to talk just a little bit about why we would want to use backups. I've put a slide up on the screen here that says live event productions. So again, there's quite a number of live concert productions where we would have live performers on stage, and we would want to make sure, obviously due to our ticket sales, or even, again, depending on the size of your stage production and budget, you want to maintain a quality of service throughout that. So redundant outputs are provided from each of the control surfaces. Network gateway outputs may be required, and this is something that, again, what we just talked about is important, that you're planning your DMX output to your rig, to your moving lights, to your LED fixtures, or your practicals. The good thing is with networking is that you can have multiple paths between 2 points with proper networking topology, and you can have some redundancy built in by spreading your outputs over multiple gateways. So single point failure, as they talk about in the rigging industry, using wire rope instead of chain, so that no one link fails and things fall. We can do that with proper network planning and routing as well. There's a lot of broadcast productions. Most of the broadcasters in Canada are using the backup scenarios of ETC consoles, where they're, again, most of the time running a full-size console and a secondary console physically in the studio space, and the failover is running, again, back to the one in the booth. This broadcast productions, or the use of this tracking backup, is also a way that in some dedicated situations where you create a wide area network situation where there's dedicated network transport between two physical locations, so whether it be two studios in a building or even sometimes a remote building, where we can have the master processor running actively in the physical studio, but we can be in another studio or down the street or even across the city running a client piece of software triggering the master. And if the internet connection goes down, obviously the master is still on site and they're able to do that. So sometimes we have the ability using this technology to do remote backup and control of a runtime environment. And then one of the last ones, I'm sure there's many others, but one of the last ones I want to talk about is essential services. So we always focus on production when we talk about our consoles first. Obviously, we're the leader in most of the playback consoles and entertainment consoles in the marketplace. But our consoles can be used to operate and maintain essential services buildings, especially spaces that have multiple control locations and need 100% uptime. So whether that's network operations centers or emergency command centers, there's quite an opportunity for our consoles, maybe not even the ones with faders, but the dedicated rack mount devices and whatnot, to be integrated into those integrated systems and provide a redundant 100% uptime control of the lighting or other features in the venue. So we do them with themed environments as well. How are we looking on time here? 1:30. Okay, I have 3 more slides and a video. And we'll kind of go from there and we'll talk about questions. So busking. Busking is, I should have looked this up. I looked it up the other day, but I'll paraphrase it. It's the act of making a performance on the fly. It's probably not the right technical term, but that's what it is. Busking is what we talk about when you're, say, in a festival environment where there's multiple bands coming up on stage. You're running through them. You don't have a preset cue list or show that you're going to be playing for the duration of the set, and you just need to make up some looks and kind of go with the vibe on the stage and whatnot. In the past, ETC EOS consoles in their first generation, a lot of people shied away from them. We had another line of consoles that provided a better solution for busking controls, but the guys at ETC have worked, and ladies have worked really hard over the last number of software releases to bring some of those busking controls to the forefront and give you things like direct selects and some magic sheets and some cue list, effect list stuff that can be directly hit from a screen. So some of the keys to making busking work on an EOS console and to make it work well are to really use the record targets called direct selects in the console. And I'm going to share a screen here and we'll talk about some of these in a second. The other one would be to look at maybe using a custom magic sheet to getting some of your busking designs up front, so you have a palette of things to choose from, both groups and colors and effects and spins and whatnot. So you, as you're basically playing the lighting console along with the performance, those things are right at your fingertips. And then the other key to making busking work well on an EOS console is definitely to make sure that you lay out your groups and record targets intelligently. I'm going to show you a small venue that's actually our Adamson demo venue up in Port Perry, Ontario, and it's a very simple magic sheet that we've built, but I'm going to talk about the use of some of those technologies if I can figure out how to get away from this screen. Let's see. Stand by. Alrighty. Hey, Michael, can you just confirm you can see the EOS screen right now?
I can see the EOS screen right now. Looks beautiful. That's an example of a magic sheet, by the way.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. So maybe just a quick discussion about magic sheets, and then I'll cover off this busking thing. So magic sheets are a drawing environment. In the theater world, magic sheets used to be a quick plot with all of the programming reference information for color, patch, focus location, kind of all top on a standard plot design. In ETC world, we can draw a physical plot. As you can see in the middle of the screen here, we have drawn a stage layout for the Adamson demo room. It has a bunch of downlights, a bunch of front lights, some wall wash. It has some practicals and a couple movers stuck in there. And the magic sheet environment in EOS software also allows you to draw basically control buttons or quick selects or faders or any of the features within the console that are dedicated buttons or commands can actually be drawn and accessed on the touchscreen on the top surface. So I'll just give you a little tour here. This magic sheet has a bunch of group selections across the top. So as an example, if I wanted to grab all the stage wash fixtures, I could simply click them, and I've set some intensities to be able to turn them off on the right-hand side. We have individual fixture selections, so I can choose a single fixture and turn it on and off. We've recorded a bunch of color palettes that allow us to simply change fixtures, colors. So as an example, if we were busking with this console setup and our direct selects up on the screen here, as well as our custom magic sheet, we could simply grab all of the stage wash fixtures and make them blue and at full intensity very, very quickly. This is true for all of the effects. All of the effects engines in ETC can be put on buttons as direct selects as well. You can grab a group, start an effect, whether it be a chase or a color fade or a motion effect with moving lights. And all of the clear functions can also be put on there. So you'll see we've put some dedicated buttons here for the clear and a sneak and home, as well as a stop effect button for a variety of things. One of the other keys for busking is to be able to maybe quickly have a performance on stage, and as they're setting up, you want to run through really quickly, make a quick look. So somebody would call up and say, listen, we're going to grab our front house spots and make them very god-awful green. Probably grab the cyc lights that are over there and make them pink and turn them up full as well. And we want to be able to store those looks quickly in a preset on the right-hand side here, or on the left-hand side. So we've put some record targets presets on the left that allow us to store those very quickly and call them back. So at any point, someone can simply click a preset button and you'll see there's our blackout preset. We can have our lights come on with our colors included in those presets. And I can build a palette, for lack of a better term, of presets that we can use to quickly bust this show. These palettes can include intensity, they can include color, they can include effects that are actually playing along, and away you go. Any good board op will have a toolbox that is ready or her ready at any one time here. They will get in and load these show files ahead of time and maybe put it up. And this is what the power of a magic sheet and busking on a EOS console allows us to do. We can have a tool palette and a paintbrush, for lack of a better term, being our finger, and quickly grab a rig and get controls. The nice thing about the EOS software is that this show file, although it has dedicated patch and dedicated fixture assignment, this show file and magic sheet can be partially imported into any other show file. So I could simply bring in my magic sheet into my other show file, lay out my fixtures in the new plot, and carry on with a new show file. So if I was moved to another venue, I'm on an actual, summer country tour where we're doing the circuit, depending on the new rig or patch, we can just modify what we have and then run with the new stage very, very quickly. So busking can be accomplished quite readily on an EOS console, and the power of these direct selects that allow us to have direct push buttons to move between, say, focus positions for our moving lights, or whether it be direct selects for color or intensity, as well as overall stage presets that can be played by pushing buttons on the left-hand side here, is the power of busking with an EOS console. I'm looking at our time. We've got one other quick video to show you. I'm going to try and switch back, do my best, push this button. There we go, and then run forward really quick. So that is a conversation or a coverage of that we are able to busk with an EOS console. If you have more questions about that, please reach out to us. There is all of the ETC learning environment and learning stage files are up on both YouTube and on their learning stage with ETC. And if you didn't realize that, ETC is currently running, I think they call it Study Hall now, where they are having online sessions daily where you can ask the professionals questions. They will be having demonstrations and whatnot. So that being said, I'm going to go to our final presentation of the day. The latest release of the EOS family of software is going to be including these features of something called Augmented 3D or Augment 3D or Augmented. And that version of software is integrated directly into the console. This is not a plugin, it's core console software and feature sets that will be included in the release. It is in what's called an open beta right now. Everybody has access to be able to download this software and play with it very, very shortly. And we're really excited to have this launch. I'm going to let the guys in the video here kind of cover what Augmented is, and then we'll go to our Q&A session. It's the old look at the birdie while I change the screens here real quick. There it is. Okay, here we go. All right, just a little quick back to our other screen and away we go. So that is just a quick overview of what Augmented 3D looks like. It will be releasing shortly, past the open beta to an open download for everybody to try. We are excited to be able to offer this to the environment. It's going to allow you to be able to do pre-visualization, as well as live real-time control of your fixtures in an augmented reality environment. It also will allow you to, as technicians, be able to go into your environment physically using your mobile app and look up at your rig and get detailed patch information and channel assignment and whatnot through an augmented, through using your mobile device in an augmented way. So venue technical directors and maintenance staff that are going to be maintaining large rigs, they get a tool they can actually use in the field that'll allow them to be able to get information and debug problems in the field in real time using augmented reality. So again, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. We're going to do our Q&A here really quickly. I'm going to get Nelson to chime in. I don't think we have any questions answered. Nelson, have we got any questions we need to answer?
No questions at this point.
Okay, and hey, Michael, you got any closing statements?
Only that the most recent software that will be released, the next version of the software that will be released on the EOS family, which includes all of the consoles from Element all the way through to EOS TI, will include augmented. So it's not something you have to pay or have a subscription for. You will need some proper networking, wireless, and the device on your handheld as well to do some of those features. And I would encourage everyone to take a look at the ETC website, not only the learning stage, but also all of the videos that are available to further describe augmented and all of the YouTube videos that are available. ETC does have their own YouTube channel and it's full of wonderful information. And that's the only thing I can add to it. And all the training videos are online, and also all of the online courses are now free until May 15th on the ETC site. So take a look at that.
Sure. Okay, so there was actually one question. Stephen asked if you can record and run presets right on the Magic Sheet, and absolutely you can. Again, any of the features on the console, you can bring top level onto a button. So if you chose to make a single button be a record or a macro assignment directly on the Magic Sheet, you absolutely can assign that there and then run that preset right from the Magic Sheet again. So thank you for your question, Stephen. We appreciate that. I don't see anybody else. Again, I'd like to thank everybody that has joined us today, and we look forward to continuing this. I'll give you the send live here so you can see me personally. So I'm in the Muskoka location. Most of the rest of the staff at CETEC is dispersed to their either home offices or remote locations. Michael, who is up here as well, we'll send him live, is currently working from the cottage for a little bit of time before he goes back to the house. And Nelson is remote as well. So if anybody needs any help, not only with these items that we've talked about today, but anything technical at all, we have some really, really capable and competent technicians that know a lot about AV, audio, lighting, networking, getting a Zoom meeting working, whatever you need. We're all here. We have a little bit of spare time to be able to offer up to anybody that needs assistance, and we'll all do our part. So again, thank you very much for everybody that's joined us, and have a wonderful day. Be safe with your families. Thank you.